I'm Alara Hawthorne, and at 25, I thought my life was finally beginning. My grandfather, the only person who ever truly saw me, had just passed away. And in a shocking twist, he left me everything, our estate, and full control of his multi-million-dollar company. But within days, my parents turned on me. They accused me of manipulation, forged documents, hired experts to declare him mentally unfit. And then, one rainy morning, my father dragged me by my hair down the marble stairs and threw me out of my own home. What they didn't know was, Grandpa had planned for everything, including this. Before I share how I fought back, let me know where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up to the very people who were supposed to protect you. My story might just be the reminder you need today. You are stronger than they think. Growing up in our sprawling Vermont estate, I always knew, deep down, that my family wasn't quite like others. My parents, Eleanor and Julian Hawthorne, were pillars of high society, the kind of people who appeared in magazines and hosted glittering galas. But in my life, they were more like passing shadows than guiding lights. From as early as I can remember, it was clear that my older sister, Lillian, now 28, was the family's golden child. On her sweet 16, she was handed the keys to a brand new Lexus. I got a gift card. When she struggled in school, they brought in the best tutors money could buy. When I brought home straight A's, I got a distracted, good job, never once drawing their eyes away from their phones. The favoritism wasn't subtle, and Lillian knew it. That only made her worse. She'd borrow my clothes and return them stained or torn. She'd invite my friends to parties, then tell them I didn't feel like coming. Once she even stole my college admissions essay and submitted it as her own, forcing me to rewrite mine from scratch the night before the deadline. Lillian's just more sensitive than you, Alara, my mother would say with a sigh whenever I tried to speak up. You need to be more understanding of her needs. My father wasn't much better. Don't stir up drama, he'd wave me off. I'm sure Lillian didn't mean anything by it. While they were off attending charity galas and expanding their social empire, there was one person who saw me, not just noticed me, but truly saw me. My grandfather, Arthur. He lived in the west tower of our estate, long retired from the multinational company he had built from the ground up. Unlike my parents, he made time. There she is, my smart girl, he'd beam whenever I visited after school, his eyes crinkling with a joy that no one else in that house ever offered. Tell me something interesting you learned today. Every weekend, Grandpa Arthur would take me sailing on his beloved boat, the Mariner, out on the water with the wind whipping through my hair and the world slipping away. He taught me how to navigate, not just the boat, but life. Sailing's like life, Alara, he'd say, his calloused hands steady on the helm. Sometimes you've got to tack against the wind to get where you're going. The straight path isn't always the one that gets you there. On stormy weekends, we'd trade the sea for museums. While Lillian grumbled about being bored, I soaked up knowledge like a sponge. Grandpa noticed. He encouraged my curiosity like it was the most precious thing in the world. Ask questions, he'd tell me. Always ask questions. That's how you grow. As I got older, our conversations deepened. We talked about business, supply chains, investments, leadership. He broke down complex financial concepts with the patience of someone who believed I was worth the effort. By high school, I knew more about our family company than Lillian ever bothered to learn, even though she was 3 years my senior. You've got a mind for this, he'd say proudly. One day you'll take what I built and make it even greater. At the time, I didn't realize how prophetic those words were, or how fiercely I'd have to fight to make them come true. Then came the diagnosis, stage 4 cancer. They gave him 6 months. He held on for 8. 8 precious, painful, beautiful months. I practically moved into his tower. I helped manage his care, coordinated with his doctors, organized his medication, and read to him for hours when his eyes were too tired to read for themselves. Lillian showed up now and then, usually when our parents pressured her, but she'd spend most of her visits scrolling through her phone, leaving as soon as she could. Our parents weren't much better. Always too busy, another fundraiser, another board meeting. Even when they did visit, they spoke over him like he wasn't there, more concerned with managing appearances than honoring the man fading before them. In his final weeks, though his body weakened, Grandpa's mind remained sharp, and so did his clarity. "Alara," he whispered one evening, his voice like tissue against the wind, "you need to listen carefully. Not everyone values integrity the way you do. Not everyone can see what truly matters." I nodded, holding his frail hand in mine. "I've seen how they treat you," he said. "I've seen the imbalance. I've made arrangements to make sure you'll be protected after I'm gone." "Don't talk like that," I begged, my tears already falling. "We have to talk like this," he insisted. "I'm entrusting you with my legacy because you understand what really matters. Promise me you'll be strong, no matter what comes." The night before he passed, he pulled me close, his breath a ghost on my cheek. "If things go wrong," he murmured, "look for my message. I prepared for everything." His eyes, sharp as ever, locked onto mine. "I'll protect you, even when I'm gone." I didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. By morning, he was gone. The funeral felt more like a performance than a farewell. My parents used it as a networking opportunity. Lillian played the grieving daughter for the cameras, accepting condolences with rehearsed grace, though I never saw her cry a single tear in private. I sat quietly, my grief too deep for display. I remembered the man who had taught me how to sail through storms, on water and in life. 1 week after the funeral, the reading of the will finally took place. We gathered in the mahogany-paneled study of the estate, our family seated stiffly among shelves of untouched books, while Mr. Thorne, our longtime family attorney, presided from behind my grandfather's old desk. Though he had always seemed more loyal to my parents than to my grandfather, that day he looked unusually tense, and then, with practiced gravity, he announced the unthinkable. My grandfather had left control of Hawthorne Corp., a company valued at nearly $10 million, to me. Along with it, I inherited the family estate. A stunned silence fell across the room. Lillian received a much smaller trust, enough for a comfortable life, but far from the luxury she had always expected. As for my parents, who had long assumed they would control the company until Lillian was ready, they were left with a few minor shares and some personal items. "This can't be right," my mother hissed, her manicured fingers digging into the leather armrest of her chair. My father's face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before. "There must be some mistake." Lillian burst into tears, not the carefully curated kind she had displayed at the funeral, but real furious sobs fueled by a sense of betrayal and entitlement. Mr. Thorne looked visibly uncomfortable. "The will is quite clear," he said. "Mr. Caldwell was very specific about his wishes." As the shock settled into a frosty tension, I noticed an exchange of glances between my parents and Mr. Thorne. My father gave the slightest nod, and Mr. Thorne cleared his throat. "Of course, there's still the matter of execution and transition," he added smoothly. "We'll need to work through the finer details over the coming weeks." Something in his tone sent a chill down my spine. I didn't know it at the time, but that moment marked the beginning of a betrayal so deep, it would cost me my home, my inheritance, and launch a war I never asked for. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in our house changed, subtly but unmistakably. Conversations would fall silent when I entered a room. Doors that had always remained open now closed softly behind me. My parents, never particularly warm, grew cold and distant. "We're just processing our grief," my mother said flatly when I asked what was wrong. The diamond bracelet on her wrist sparkled as she waved away my concern, like it was nothing more than dust on fine china. Strangely, Lillian transformed overnight. Suddenly, she was the model daughter, bringing coffee to our parents in the morning, asking about their day, volunteering to help at my mother's charity events. To me, she remained just as cruel as ever, except now it was laced with smug satisfaction. "Enjoy your little moment in the sun," she whispered one evening, cornering me outside my bedroom. "Don't get too comfortable with Grandpa's things." When I tried to access my grandfather's study to begin reviewing his business records, I found it in disarray, papers being sorted, boxes labeled and moved. "Just some organizing," my father said casually when I asked. "Mr. Thorne needs a few documents for the probate process." Later that day, I overheard an argument behind my father's closed office door. "We need to fix Arthur's mistake before it's too late," my mother said, her voice sharp and urgent. "I'm working on it," my father replied. "Thorne says we have options." I confronted them that night at dinner. What exactly are you planning? I asked, my tone blunt. Don't be paranoid, Alara, my father said calmly, slicing his steak with surgical precision. This is exactly why your grandfather should have handled this more rationally. You're clearly not ready for this kind of responsibility. My mother nodded, concern feigned. The pressure's obviously getting to you. Maybe you should talk to Dr. Henderson about anxiety medication. That night, I called my friend Chloe and told her everything, the strange behavior, the growing tension. Something's really wrong, I said. They're planning something, I can feel it. Your family's always had issues, Chloe replied, her voice uneasy. But this sounds different. Can you check if anything important is missing? The next morning, I took her advice and went to the safe in Grandpa's study. It was open and empty. All the financial records I knew he'd kept there were gone. Panicked, I reached out to Ms. Evelyn, Grandpa's longtime assistant who had retired just before his illness. We met at a quiet cafe in town, far away from the estate's watchful eyes. She looked nervous, constantly glancing over her shoulder. I can't say much, she said, stirring her untouched latte. But your grandfather was worried, very worried, about exactly this. About what? I asked, leaning in. She lowered her voice. He suspected they'd try to challenge the will. That's why he was so meticulous about the documentation. Challenge it how? I pressed. They could claim he wasn't of sound mind, or that you manipulated him. Before I could ask more, she stood abruptly. I shouldn't be talking to you, just be careful, Alara. Your parents have more influence than you realize. She left cash on the table and hurried away, leaving me with more questions than answers. That afternoon, Mr. Thorne requested a private meeting at his downtown office. Surrounded by law degrees and family photos, he leaned back in his leather chair and gave me a patronizing smile. Your grandfather's decisions have stirred quite a bit of unrest, he said. Perhaps we can reach a resolution that works for everyone. There's nothing to negotiate, I replied firmly. My grandfather's wishes were clear. He smiled thinly. Wishes can be interpreted, especially when there are questions about mental capacity. I felt the air grow cold. He was perfectly lucid, right up to the end. Of course you'd say that, he nodded sympathetically. But medical experts may disagree, and juries tend to be skeptical when elderly men suddenly rewrite wills to benefit younger relatives who spend unusual amounts of time with them near the end. The implication was sickening and unmistakable. I left his office and immediately called Mr. Sterling, a trusted estate attorney and father of a former classmate, with no ties to my family. His findings were alarming. They've filed preliminary paperwork suggesting your grandfather may have been mentally unfit, he said. And there are rumors of a revised will, one that supposedly overrides the original. That evening, my parents convened a family meeting. Seated at the polished dining table beneath our glittering chandelier, they for the first time openly suggested the will might be contested. It's in everyone's best interest to avoid a prolonged legal battle, my father said with icy reason. Grandpa wanted me to have the company, I insisted. He spent years preparing me. That's your interpretation, my mother replied coolly. The court will consider all the facts, including your grandfather's deteriorating state of mind during his illness. Lillian said nothing, just sat silently, a smug little smile playing on her lips. Over the next 2 weeks, the isolation became total. The security codes were changed without telling me. My belongings began disappearing from shared spaces and reappearing mysteriously in my bedroom. Household staff who had once greeted me with warm smiles now kept their distance. My home office had clearly been searched. Papers shuffled, my laptop slightly out of place. When I brought it up, my parents brushed it off. You're becoming paranoid, they said. You might need help. It was psychological warfare, calculated and unrelenting. I knew what they were doing, building a case, undermining my mental stability, cutting me off from allies. I began backing up key documents and storing them with Mr. Sterling. I recorded conversations when legally allowed. I prepared for battle. Still, even in my darkest moments, I couldn't have imagined just how far they were willing to go. 3 weeks after the will was read, on a stormy Tuesday morning, Mr. Davies, the family butler, appeared at my door with a stiff posture and an expression void of his usual warmth. He avoided my eyes as he informed me that my presence was requested in the formal dining room for a family meeting. The words sent a quiet tremor through me, though I couldn't yet explain why. The moment I stepped inside, I knew this wasn't going to be a typical family discussion. My parents sat at the head of the long, polished table, Lillian positioned loyally beside them. Mr. Thorne was there too, along with another man I didn't recognize, who was introduced as Dr. Maxwell, a medical consultant. "Sit down, Alara," my father said curtly. No greetings, no pleasantries, just a command. Once I was seated, Mr. Thorne cleared his throat and began with the polished formality of someone delivering a premeditated strike. "We've come across some deeply troubling information regarding your grandfather's will," he said, sliding a folder across the mahogany. Inside were what appeared to be medical evaluations from Grandpa's final month, documents implying cognitive decline consistent with both his illness and the medications he had been prescribed. "And," Thorne added, as if the blow wasn't enough, presenting another paper, "there's this." It was a letter, supposedly written by my grandfather, expressing concerns that I had manipulated him during his illness and requesting that any changes to his will be reevaluated. "This is outrageous," I snapped, my voice trembling with fury. "That's not even his handwriting. Anyone who actually knew him would see that in an instant." "It's been verified by handwriting experts," Thorne said smoothly. "What experts? Let me guess. Ones you paid?" I shot back. My mother interjected, her tone dripping with a manufactured softness. "Alara, we know this is difficult, but the evidence is clear. Your grandfather wasn't himself near the end." "We've already filed the necessary paperwork," my father added, his voice as steady as stone. "The court has issued a temporary injunction, freezing all asset transfers until further investigation." That's when Lillian finally chimed in, her performance meticulously rehearsed. "I never wanted it to come to this," she said, her eyes welling with crocodile tears. "I told them we should just split everything evenly." The sheer audacity of her lie made my blood boil. "You planned this from the moment the will was read," I accused. "All of you." "That kind of paranoid thinking is exactly what concerns us," Dr. Maxwell cut in, despite not having had the decency to even introduce himself properly. "Your family's worried about your mental state." I pulled out my phone, the same phone where I'd saved photos of the original documents, real medical assessments from Grandpa's actual doctors, and notes from our business talks. My grandfather was fully lucid, I declared, holding out the screen. His doctors confirmed it multiple times. He was discussing investment strategies with me the day before he passed. His mind was sharp until the very end. My father's face darkened. "That's enough, Alara. The decision's been made." "What decision?" I asked, my voice brittle. "The court has temporarily transferred all control of the estate to us," Thorne explained. "Given the volatility of the situation, your parents have decided it's best that you vacate the property. Immediately." The shock hit like a physical blow. "You're throwing me out? This is my home. Grandpa left it to me." "Not anymore," my mother said coldly. "The ownership is in dispute, and as the current legal residents with the longest tenure, we reserve the right to determine who stays." "You have until this afternoon to gather your belongings," my father added flatly. Lillian's smug grin slipped through the cracks of her mask. "Need help packing?" she offered, mock sweetness in her voice. I stood up so fast my chair toppled backward. "You won't get away with this. Grandpa would be disgusted by what you're doing." "Well, Grandpa's not here," Lillian said calmly, "and soon neither will you be." I stormed upstairs, my mind racing. I had to salvage what I could. Important documents, treasured keepsakes, enough clothes to get me through the coming days. I yanked my largest suitcase from the closet and began stuffing it with anything essential. I was folding a sweater when my mother appeared in the doorway, eyes narrowed. "You're not allowed to take anything of value," she announced, "nothing that could be considered part of the estate." "These are my personal belongings," I said sharply, continuing to pack. "Everything in this house now belongs to the estate," she insisted, stepping into the room. "Hand me the bag." I gripped the suitcase tighter. "No." Her face contorted in fury. "Ungrateful little snake, after everything we've done for you." "Done for me," I laughed bitterly. "You ignored me my entire life. Grandpa was the only one who ever gave a damn." "Because you manipulated him," she screamed. "Julian, she's stealing from the estate." Within seconds, my father appeared, almost like he'd been waiting just outside the door. "Give me the bag, Alara," he demanded. his voice quiet but deadly. "No," I repeated, backing away. "These are mine. You've already stolen millions from me. You're not taking my clothes too." What happened next unfolded so fast, I barely had time to scream. My father lunged, not for the bag but for a fistful of my hair. Pain shot through my scalp as he dragged me toward the door. "Julian," my mother gasped. Though whether it was in shock or support, I couldn't tell. "You want to defy us?" he snarled, yanking me down the hallway. This is what happens to manipulative little girls who bite the hand that fed them. I kicked and screamed, but his grip was iron. He dragged me past Lillian, who simply watched with wide eyes, and past household staff, who turned away instead of intervening. Down the grand staircase we went, my body banging against each step, his hand never loosening. Through the marble foyer and toward the front doors, which my mother flung open with mechanical precision. With one final violent shove, my father threw me out into the rain-soaked driveway. My suitcase followed, tossed with such force it split open, sending my belongings sprawling across the wet pavement. "You are no longer welcome in this house," he declared, straightening his tie like he hadn't just assaulted his own daughter. "Any attempt to return will be considered trespassing." Through tears of rage and pain, I steadied myself enough to say one last thing. "You think you've won, but Grandpa was smarter than all of you put together. When this is over, you'll regret the day you betrayed his wishes." And me. The massive oak doors slammed shut, sealing me out in the cold storm, scalp throbbing, heart shattered, surrounded by the broken pieces of what remained of my life. Security guards appeared near the gate, making it clear I was banned from re-entry. I scrambled to gather what I could, stuffing soaked clothes back into the broken suitcase with trembling hands. Then I called the only person I could trust, Chloe. "I need help," I choked through tears. "They threw me out. I have nowhere to go." While I waited for her beneath the shelter of an old oak at the edge of the property, the full weight of what had happened finally settled in. In a single morning, I'd lost my home, my inheritance, and any illusion that my family had ever loved me. But through the heartbreak and disbelief, I remembered Grandpa's voice. I prepared for every possibility. And I realized the fight was just beginning. Chloe arrived within 20 minutes, her compact car pulling up just outside the estate's front gate. The look on her face when she saw me, soaking wet, hair matted, cheeks streaked with tears, and a fresh bruise blooming on my cheek where I'd hit the stairs, told me just how terrible I must have looked. "Oh my God, Ilara," she gasped, leaping from the car and rushing toward me, fumbling with my broken suitcase. "What happened to you?" I couldn't speak right away. The moment I slid into the passenger seat and the doors closed behind me, the adrenaline that had been holding me together finally collapsed. I broke down into uncontrollable sobs, the kind that seemed to come from somewhere too deep to name. Chloe took me to her apartment, a modest one-bedroom flat in the city where she'd moved after college. She helped me into the shower, brought me clean clothes, and sat beside me on the couch while I tried to explain what had happened between waves of tears. "We have to call the police," she said firmly after I described how my father had dragged me by my hair. "That's assault. They can't just do that to you." The next morning, still in shock, I agreed to file a report. We went to the local police station, where a tired-looking officer listened to my statement with a blend of disinterest and skepticism. "So you're saying your father, Julian Hawthorne of Hawthorne Holdings, physically removed you from the house?" he asked, typing slowly into his computer. "Yes," I answered, my voice steady. "By my hair, down a staircase." He looked up, his eyebrows lifting. "Julian Hawthorne, that Julian Hawthorne," I nodded. "And this happened in the context of a disputed inheritance." "That's not a dispute," I corrected. "That's theft. They're trying to steal what my grandfather legally left to me." His tone shifted, ever so slightly. "I'll file the report, but I have to warn you, this sounds like a civil matter. Family estate issues usually get sorted out in court, not through criminal charges." "The theft, sure," I agreed. "But assault is a crime." He nodded, non-committal. "I'll refer it to a detective, but don't hold your breath, without a witness willing to testify." I left the station with the sinking feeling that nothing would come of it. That feeling was confirmed 3 days later, when I received a call informing me that the district attorney's office had declined to press charges due to lack of evidence and the civil nature of the underlying dispute. By that point, I had already met with Mr. Sterling to understand my legal options. "They're moving fast," he warned, scanning the paperwork my parents had filed. "The mental incompetence angle is their strongest card. They've already submitted statements from several medical professionals." "But his real doctors confirmed he was of sound mind," I protested. "They did and will present that evidence. But your parents have managed to find experts willing to testify that someone in your grandfather's condition typically exhibits signs of cognitive decline." "And what about that letter? It's a forgery, obviously." "We'll request a handwriting analysis," Mr. Sterling assured me. "But Alara, these cases can take years, and they have the resources to wage a very long legal war." "So do I said fiercely. "I have my inheritance." His expression darkened. "That's the problem. Until this is resolved, you don't have access to any of it. And based on what you've told me, they've already seized control of all the liquid assets." Reality hit like a fist to the gut. I had less than $3,000 in my personal bank account, money I'd earned from a summer internship before grad school. My credit cards were tied to family accounts, which had surely been canceled by now. "What am I supposed to do?" I whispered, the weight of it finally crashing down. "Do you have any friends you can stay with? Extended family who could help?" I shook my head. "Just Chloe, and she can only keep me on her couch for so long." As I feared, Chloe got a call from her landlord just a week after I moved in. Somehow my parents had discovered where I was and applied pressure. They threatened to buy out the whole building and evict everyone unless he enforced the no long-term guest policy, Chloe explained, ashamed. I pushed back, but I can't risk making everyone else homeless. I understood. This wasn't her fight. I couldn't drag her down with me. The next 3 weeks were a blur of dingy motels, cheap food, and constant anxiety. I spent what little money I had on bare necessities while applying for any job I could find. Waiting tables, front desk reception, even temp filing. But every promising lead evaporated. Eventually, a kind hiring manager pulled me aside after an interview. "I don't know what you did to upset the Hawthorns," she whispered. "But we got a call from one of our investors warning us not to hire you. I'm sorry." Their reach was deeper than I ever imagined. They weren't just stealing my inheritance. They were burning every bridge I tried to cross. When my bank balance fell below $300, I made the painful decision to sell my laptop, the last valuable possession I owned. The pawn shop gave me $400, a fraction of what it was worth. It bought me 5 more nights in a budget motel and a handful of cheap meals. I clung to every dollar like it was oxygen. But I knew. Time was running out. On the final night, I had a roof over my head. I sat at the edge of a sagging motel bed, staring out the window into the darkness, wondering what would happen when the money ran out. The thought of sleeping in my car, my last remaining possession, filled me with a hollow sort of fear. It was just a modest Honda Civic, one I had bought with my own internship money, but now it represented the only sanctuary I had left. In a moment of desperation, I dumped the contents of my damaged suitcase onto the bed, digging through the mess for anything I could possibly sell. That's when I saw it, a gleam of gold amid the chaos, my grandfather's old pocket watch. I had grabbed it instinctively on the day I was forced out, knowing even then that it was one of the last tangible pieces of him I had left. Holding its heavy frame in my hand, I was flooded with memories of sailing with him under open skies, of him checking that watch as he taught me how to chart our position by the sun. "A good timepiece," he used to say, "isn't just for telling time. It's for those who understand how to read its secrets." As I turned the watch over in my palm, I noticed something odd about the back. A barely visible seam ran along the edge, one I hadn't seen before. On instinct, I pressed along the border in the same pattern he had once taught me to open his personal safe. To my shock, the back panel clicked and sprang open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a small USB drive and a neatly folded piece of paper, written in his unmistakable hand. With trembling fingers, I opened the note. "My dearest Alara, if you're reading this, then the worst has come to pass. I feared they might try to take from you what is rightfully yours. They were always envious of our bond, of the potential I saw in you. This drive contains everything you'll need. Certified copies of my medical evaluations affirming my sound mind, recordings of our business discussions that show your readiness to lead, and documentation of accounts only I was aware of. Most importantly, contact Richard Donovan at the address below. He's been my friend for 40 years, and he's expecting you. I've arranged for him to help you access what I secured for exactly this scenario. Remember what I taught you about sailing against the wind. Sometimes, the path to victory begins with retreat. All my love, Arthur. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel: hope. I called Mr. Donovan immediately. To my surprise, he insisted on coming to get me himself, that very night. Arthur told me there would come a day when you might call, he said gently, as we drove through the countryside toward his home. He suspected they might try something like this, though I'll admit, even he didn't anticipate the sheer cruelty they've shown. His farmhouse, spacious, quiet, surrounded by trees, became my refuge. From the comfort of his living room, I plugged in the USB and began combing through its contents. What I found nearly took my breath away. My grandfather hadn't just worried that my family might betray him, he had documented everything. There were audio recordings of my parents discussing ways to control him during his illness, emails between Lillian and my father strategizing about influencing the will, and files detailing past attempts to siphon funds from the company. But most powerful of all were the recordings of my grandfather himself, calm, articulate, deliberate, stating his wishes in no uncertain terms. He wanted me to inherit the company. He believed in my judgment, my ethics, my genuine interest in preserving his legacy. He contrasted that with Lillian's recklessness and my parents' obsession with status over substance. And in those files, I didn't just find evidence. I found my grandfather's voice, steady, unwavering, filled with pride. It was the proof I needed and the strength I didn't know I still had. The USB drive also contained access to several offshore accounts totaling nearly $2 million, funds my grandfather had quietly set aside for emergencies. They were completely separate from the official estate, hidden from the prying eyes of my parents, their lawyers, and even the probate court. He called it his personal insurance policy, Mr. Elias explained, as he poured me a glass of my grandfather's favorite whiskey. Arthur knew exactly who he was dealing with. He just hoped it wouldn't come to this. The very next day, Mr. Elias introduced me to Mr. Beckett, my grandfather's longtime business partner who had retired 5 years earlier. Arthur and I planned for this possibility, Mr. Beckett confirmed, carefully examining the files I had recovered. There are safeguards in place, ones your parents know nothing about. With secure funds, a safe roof over my head, and powerful allies at my side, for the first time in weeks, I had the tools to begin fighting back. Mr. Sterling joined us at Mr. Elias's home, bringing with him legal briefs and carefully laid strategies. With this evidence, he said as he reviewed the audio recordings, we're in a much stronger position, but we need to play this smart. Your parents won't hesitate to go low and stay there. Over the next 2 weeks, we built a comprehensive plan. I hired a private investigator, Detective Hayes, to dig into Lillian's activities. He uncovered significant gambling debts at multiple casinos, debts that mysteriously vanished right after I was thrown out of the estate. He also discovered that my parents' company was teetering on the edge of collapse. They had taken out massive loans, using their anticipated inheritance as collateral to fund a series of high-risk ventures, all of which had spectacularly failed. They're at least $15 million in the red, Mr. Beckett concluded, scanning the financial records Hayes had retrieved. Without your share of the estate, they'll lose everything, the business, the house, their social standing, all of it. That level of desperation explained a lot. It wasn't just greed, it was survival, and they were willing to forge documents, commit fraud, even physically assault me, anything to keep their world from crashing down. We also discovered that the medical expert who had questioned my grandfather's mental state had never actually examined him, and had been paid an obscene consulting fee by my parents. Most damning of all, we found proof that Mr. Thorne himself had helped draft the forged letter attributed to my grandfather. The document's metadata showed it had been created 2 weeks after my grandfather had passed. Each new revelation strengthened our case, but Mr. Sterling offered a warning. Be patient, he said. We need to build this airtight. The moment we file, they'll start destroying whatever evidence they can. During this strategic pause, Mr. Elias opened a hidden compartment in his safe and handed me a leather-bound journal, my grandfather's. Inside were years of entries detailing the manipulative behavior of my parents, schemes to seize control of company assets, attempts to isolate my grandfather from his lifelong friends, and a steady pattern of favoring Lillian while belittling me. One entry, written just a few months before his diagnosis, struck me to my core. Eleanor and Julian continue to underestimate Alara. Their blindness to her strength may be their greatest weakness, and perhaps her greatest advantage. Lillian plays their game, tells them what they want to hear. Alara stands her ground. I've decided to secure her future, even if it means they'll resent me for it. Some legacies are worth more than temporary peace. Reading those words, I felt something shift inside me, a renewed connection to the man who had always believed in me, who had prepared for this war when I couldn't even see it coming. I no longer questioned my purpose. I knew exactly what I was fighting for, and I knew I wouldn't stop until I saw it through. By the end of the month, we had gathered enough evidence to secure a temporary injunction freezing several disputed assets. That initial legal victory sent a shockwave through my family. Suddenly, my parents were calling nonstop, leaving voicemails that swung wildly between veiled threats and awkward attempts at reconciliation. Lillian left one teary message claiming she was caught in the middle and never wanted things to go this far. I ignored all of them. Instead, I poured every ounce of energy into building my case, remaining completely off the grid. My parents didn't know where I was or who was helping me, and I intended to keep it that way until the perfect moment to strike. Mr. Elias's guest house had become my war room. With the financial security of my grandfather's emergency fund and the loyalty of those he'd trusted, I assembled a small but dedicated team to take back what was rightfully mine. Mr. Sterling spearheaded the legal strategy, while Mr. Beckett, my grandfather's former business partner, brought insider knowledge of the company's structure and vulnerabilities. Your grandfather built contingency into everything, Beckett said, spreading a blueprint of the company's charter across the dining room table. He had backup plans for his backup plans. One of those hidden protections involved a quiet amendment to the company bylaws Arthur had made before his illness. The revision required any significant asset transfer or restructuring to be approved by a special ethics committee, composed not only of family members, but of trusted former colleagues. Your parents can't act without convincing that committee, Beckett explained. And those folks are loyal to Arthur, not Eleanor and Julian. Our first strategic move was to reach out to Ms. Jenkins, my grandfather's longtime secretary, and the witness to his original will. I've been waiting for your call, she said, when we met at a quiet cafe outside the city. I knew something was wrong the moment I heard the will was being contested. Your grandfather was sharp as a tack, right up to the end. She provided a sworn statement detailing the will's signing, her personal observations of Arthur's clarity, and the specific instructions he had given regarding his final wishes. Next, we gathered testimony from several household staff members who had overheard my parents discussing plans to dispute the will, conversations that began before my grandfather even passed. Some of them recalled exact phrasing. Others were simply eager to stand up after learning how I'd been violently thrown out of my home. Meanwhile, Detective Hayes, the private investigator I'd hired, completed his report on Lillian's financial activity. Your sister has a serious gambling problem, he said, showing me surveillance photos of her at high-stakes tables in Atlantic City and Las Vegas. She lost over $300,000 just last year. More damning, though, was what he discovered next. A sudden payment that had cleared all her casino debts. The date? The day after I was forced from the estate. The money came from a company account that should have been frozen during probate, Hayes noted. That's a blatant violation of the court's asset freeze. Digging deeper into my parents' finances revealed the real motivation behind their desperation. Hawthorne Holdings, my father's private investment firm, had made a string of catastrophic decisions, leveraging the company to the hilt on risky ventures that had collapsed in spectacular fashion. They're underwater by at least $15 million, Beckett said after combing through financial records. Without your share of the estate, they'll lose everything: the company, the mansion, their standing in society. Suddenly, the lies, the violence, the forged documents, it all made sense. This wasn't just about greed, it was about survival, and they had decided I was collateral damage. In a separate discovery, I uncovered one of my grandfather's personal journals. a leather-bound volume tucked inside a secure box Mr. Elias had kept. Page after page recorded Arthur's growing unease about my parents' business practices and their treatment of me. One entry stood out, written years before his death. Julian came to me today asking that I alter the will to favor Lillian. When I refused, suggesting Alara's business acumen made her the better choice, he grew angry. I fear what they'll do when I'm gone. I must protect Alara's inheritance at all costs. With overwhelming evidence in hand, Mr. Sterling filed a comprehensive lawsuit against my parents, Lillian and Mr. Thorne, alleging fraud, forgery, misappropriation of assets, and breach of fiduciary duty. The legal filing sent shockwaves through the business world. Hawthorne Holdings stock dropped 15% in a single day, as investors reacted to allegations of financial misconduct and document falsification. My parents scrambled to control the narrative. Press releases painted me as unstable and ungrateful. Lillian gave a teary interview, claiming she was heartbroken over the family conflict and just wanted fairness for everyone. Their PR campaign gained mild traction until we sent anonymous tips to several business publications revealing the unauthorized gambling debt payouts. Financial reporters began digging, and what they found led to more troubling questions about the firm's internal accounting. Meanwhile, Lillian's text messages grew increasingly frantic. "Alara, please, we need to talk. This has gone too far. I never wanted them to hurt you. I don't even understand what's happening anymore. Mom and Dad are falling apart. Can we meet somewhere private? I know you hate me right now, but I'm scared of what Dad might do. He's not himself anymore." I didn't respond. I saw the messages for what they were, an attempt to locate me, or worse, to manipulate me emotionally. Mr. Sterling advised complete silence with all family members until the court proceedings began. And I agreed, because this time, I was the one setting the terms. The pressure on my parents escalated when several members of the ethics committee abruptly resigned in protest, citing concerns over fraudulent documents they'd discovered. Their public statements, expressing doubts about my parents' integrity and business practices, only deepened the growing cloud of suspicion. By the time our case reached its preliminary hearing, public sentiment had shifted dramatically. Major financial publications began publishing articles questioning the leadership at Hawthorne Holdings, and the once glittering social circles that had embraced my parents began whispering about their rapid fall from grace. During all this, I remained completely out of sight, hidden away at Mr. Elias's guest house, avoiding any public appearances. My parents had no idea where I was or who was assisting me, a strategic advantage that clearly frustrated them, as evidenced by the private investigators we discovered tailing Mr. Sterling's office and surveilling every known residence of Mr. Elias. As the main trial date approached, we prepared to unveil our most decisive evidence, a video testimony recorded by my grandfather shortly before his death. In it, he clearly outlined his final wishes and voiced specific concerns about potential interference by my parents. I, Arthur Caldwell, the video began, being of sound mind, record this on June 12th to affirm my decision to leave control of Hawthorne Holdings and the family estate to my granddaughter, Alara Caldwell. The video lasted nearly 20 minutes. In it, my grandfather methodically explained his reasoning, directly addressing foreseeable objections to his choices. Remarkably, he even underwent a brief cognitive evaluation on camera, administered by his primary physician, to demonstrate his mental clarity and decision-making capacity. No one, not my parents, not their legal team, had any idea this recording existed. It was our ace in the hole, irrefutable proof of his sound mind and his unwavering intent. It couldn't be dismissed as manipulation or forged. The night before the hearing, I received a surprising email from Mr. Davies, our family's longtime butler of more than 2 decades. "Miss Alara," it read, "I can't stay silent any longer about what happened. The way your father treated you was inexcusable, and I'm ashamed I did nothing to stop it. I've submitted my resignation, and I'm prepared to testify about what I witnessed that day and what I overheard in the weeks leading up to it. Please let me know if my statement can help your case." I wept reading his words, tears of unexpected relief. It was the first sign that someone from my old life was willing to stand up for what was right, even if it cost them everything. That night, before bed, I sat quietly turning my grandfather's gold pocket watch over in my palm. My thumb traced the smooth curve of its back, and I whispered into the silence, "I hope I'm making you proud. Tomorrow, we fight." The courthouse steps were swarming with reporters when we arrived. For months, I'd stayed entirely out of public view, allowing my parents and sister to dominate the narrative. But today, that would change. I stepped out of Mr. Elias's car in a tailored navy suit that once belonged to my grandmother, another treasured heirloom my grandfather had carefully preserved for me. My hair was styled professionally, concealing the thin scar at my scalp, where my father's hand had left a permanent mark. Camera flashes exploded as soon as the reporters recognized me. Mr. Sterling walked calmly beside me, exuding steady confidence as journalists shouted over one another. "Miss Caldwell, where have you been hiding? Alara, how do you respond to your family's claims about your mental state? Is it true you manipulated your grandfather during his final days?" I said nothing. I kept walking, eyes fixed ahead on the courthouse doors. There would be time for answers, but that moment wasn't it. Inside the courtroom, I saw my parents and Lillian for the first time since being forced out of my home. My mother's jaw dropped when she saw me. She leaned toward my father and whispered something urgent. Lillian couldn't meet my gaze. She stared at the floor, visibly shaken. Mr. Thorne hunched forward, whispering intently to a row of 5 high-powered attorneys from one of the city's most prestigious firms. On our side, we were fewer in number, but not in strength. Just Mr. Sterling, Mr. Beckett, and 2 dedicated associates. And me, stronger than I had ever been. Judge Eleanor Harrington, renowned for her unflinching integrity and no-nonsense courtroom demeanor, called the session to order. "Before we begin," she said, her voice calm but commanding, "I want to make it clear that I have reviewed the preliminary evidence submitted by both parties. Some of the allegations before this court are deeply troubling." She paused, allowing her gaze to sweep slowly across the room. "This court will not tolerate forged documents, witness intimidation, or the unauthorized transfer of disputed assets during ongoing litigation." Her eyes landed firmly on my father, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat under her scrutiny. The proceedings began with my parents' legal team laying out their case. They claimed my grandfather's mental faculties had deteriorated in his final months. They accused me of manipulating a vulnerable old man into changing his estate plans. According to them, the will naming me as the primary beneficiary did not reflect his true intentions. They offered testimony from doctors who had never actually treated my grandfather. Doctors who, nonetheless, speculated on how age might have affected his cognitive abilities. They submitted the forged letter calling his decisions into question, and painted me as a cunning granddaughter who had isolated him from his family. Then came our turn, and Mr. Sterling dismantled their arguments piece by piece. First, he called my grandfather's actual physicians, who testified under oath that Arthur Caldwell remained mentally sharp until the end, routinely engaging in complex business discussions and making decisions that were thoughtful, consistent, and lucid. Next came Miss Jenkins, his longtime secretary, who had witnessed the signing of the will. She described his explicit instructions and the clarity with which he had spoken that day. Several members of the household staff followed, testifying that they had overheard my parents plotting to contest the will even before my grandfather passed, contradicting their claim of being shocked by its contents. Then our financial experts presented damning evidence. The infamous letter, supposedly authored by my grandfather, had been created 2 weeks after his death, on a computer registered to Mr. Thorne's law office. But our most powerful moment came when Mr. Sterling introduced the video testimony my grandfather had recorded. The courtroom fell into complete silence as the image of Arthur Caldwell appeared on screen. Even in his frail physical state, his mental acuity radiated through the screen. Methodically, he addressed and dismissed every possible objection he anticipated my parents might raise. His words were clear, calm, and unshakable. "Alara has shown a keen business sense, strong ethical judgment, and a sincere commitment to preserving this company's legacy, qualities I have long hoped to see in a successor," he said. "Though I love all of my family, I must base this decision not on sentiment, but on who will best preserve what I've built and carry it forward with honor." The final minute of the video left me breathless and in tears. "If this recording is being played, then my decisions have been challenged," he said solemnly. To those attempting to overturn my clearly stated wishes, know this: I foresaw your actions and took measures to ensure my true intent prevails. And to Alara, remember, real strength often rises from adversity. I believe in you. When the video ended, I noticed my mother dabbing her eyes, though whether her tears were real or rehearsed, I couldn't say. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw locked tight. Lillian looked pale, like the wind had been knocked out of her. Then came the final blow to their case, from a place none of us had expected. Mr. Davies, our longtime butler, took the stand. In a steady voice, he described the day I was thrown out of the house, the way my father had dragged me by the hair down the staircase, while my mother and Lillian stood by and did nothing. In 23 years of serving the Hawthorne family, he said quietly, I've never witnessed cruelty like that. Miss Alara did nothing to deserve such treatment, no matter what disagreements existed over the estate. By the time closing arguments ended, the shift in the courtroom was palpable. Judge Harrington's expression had grown grimmer with every new revelation, especially those involving forged documents and stolen assets. After a brief recess, she returned to deliver her ruling. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, this court finds that Arthur Caldwell was of sound mind when he executed his will. The document submitted by the defendants in an attempt to challenge the original is a forgery. The original will shall stand, fully and without amendment. Then, her tone sharpened. Furthermore, this court finds that Julian and Eleanor Hawthorne, along with their attorney, Mr. Thorne, engaged in fraudulent conduct in an attempt to undermine a lawful estate plan. All assets transferred during the course of this dispute must be returned immediately to the estate, to be distributed in accordance with the original will. And finally, her voice cold as steel, she added, given the evidence of document forgery and misappropriation of estate assets, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for possible criminal prosecution. Mr. Thorne, I am also referring you to the State Bar for review of potential ethical violations. And just like that, the truth, long buried beneath lies, greed, and manipulation, stood tall in the light of justice. Outside the courtroom, my parents tried to approach me. My father's expression was a strange, uneasy mix of anger and desperation. Alara, we need to talk, he said, reaching out as if to take my hand. Mr. Sterling swiftly stepped between us. My client has nothing to say to you outside of formal legal communication, he said firmly. Any further attempt to contact her directly will be considered harassment. As security began escorting them away, I heard my mother whisper, we have to offer her a deal. We can't afford to lose everything. 3 days after the ruling, once the reality of their defeat began to sink in, I received a call from my parents' new attorney. Mr. Thorne had been suspended, pending investigation. They'd like to discuss a potential settlement, the lawyer began. The judge's decision was clear, I replied calmly. There's nothing to settle. They're prepared to drop all appeals and publicly acknowledge the will's validity, he continued. In return, they're asking for a modest portion of the estate to maintain their current home and lifestyle. I considered it briefly, then answered, I'll agree to a meeting, but I'm not promising anything. The meeting was held at Mr. Sterling's office, a neutral setting. My parents arrived looking worn down, the toll of recent weeks etched into their faces. Lillian came separately and sat a little distance away from them, as if to signal some moral detachment. My father spoke first. His usual commanding tone had softened into something almost pleading. Alara, he said, we made a terrible mistake. We were desperate. The business was failing. We were on the verge of losing everything. We never meant for it to go this far. You dragged me out of the house by my hair, I said, steady and quiet. You threw me into the street with almost nothing. You tried to destroy my reputation and my future. That wasn't a mistake. Those were choices. My mother dabbed her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. We were wrong, so terribly wrong. But we're still your parents. Surely that must mean something. It meant nothing when you chose Lillian over me my whole life, I said. It meant nothing when you forged documents to steal what my grandfather left me. So why should it mean anything now? Lillian finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. They made me do it, Alara. They told me if I didn't go along with their plan, they'd cut me off too. I was scared. You're 28, Lillian, I replied. You had a choice. You watched them hurt me and did nothing. My father leaned forward, his voice sharper now. What do you want, Alara? Name your price. There must be some kind of deal we can reach. I looked at each of them, these people who had betrayed me so completely, and felt a strange, quiet calm settle over me. I want you out of the estate by the end of the month, I said clearly. You may take your personal belongings, but nothing that belonged to my grandfather. Lillian's trust will remain as he intended, but you two, I looked at my parents, will receive only what's explicitly outlined in the will. That's it, my father asked in disbelief. We'll go bankrupt. You destroyed yourselves, I corrected him. Be grateful I'm not pressing criminal charges for assault and fraud. 2 weeks later, I stood in the grand foyer of the estate, my estate now, watching my parents oversee the loading of their belongings into a moving truck. They had found a modest house in a nearby town, a far cry from the lavish life they once flaunted. As they prepared to leave, my father approached me one last time. You've won, Alara, he said flatly. I hope it gives you the satisfaction you were looking for. I looked him straight in the eyes. This was never about winning, Dad. It was about honoring my grandfather's wishes and standing up for myself. Something I should have done a long time ago. He gave a stiff nod and walked away without another word. My mother followed, not even glancing back. After they left, I wandered slowly through the house that had never truly felt like home, until now. In my grandfather's study, restored with his books and keepsakes, I placed his pocket watch on the desk and whispered, "We did it, Grandpa, just like you planned." The victory was complete. But as I stood alone in that enormous house, I felt a hollowness I hadn't anticipated. Not because I missed my parents or the toxic presence they brought, but because winning a battle isn't the same as healing from the war. In the weeks after my family left, I often found myself wandering the long corridors of the estate, wrapped in an eerie kind of emptiness. Though I had won, though justice had prevailed, the halls echoed with memories, some painful, a few precious, but all belonging to a life that no longer existed. I had reclaimed my inheritance and vindicated my grandfather's wishes, but the cost was steep. The severing of every familial tie, and the public airing of our most intimate betrayals. It was a victory laced with silence and solitude. At the urging of Mr. Elias, who had in many ways become the father figure I never truly had, I began meeting with Dr. Anya Sharma, a therapist specializing in family trauma and betrayal. What you're feeling is completely normal, Dr. Sharma reassured me in our first session. You've been deeply wounded by the very people who were meant to protect you. Legal victory doesn't automatically bring emotional healing. Our weekly sessions became a lifeline as I navigated this new, unfamiliar reality. We unpacked years of pain, of being overlooked and undervalued, the acute trauma of being dragged from my home, and the tangled grief of estrangement from people who once called themselves family. I thought I'd feel happier, I confessed one day. I have everything my grandfather wanted for me, but sometimes all I feel is empty. Justice and healing, Dr. Sharma said softly, are not the same thing. One happens on the outside, the other takes root on the inside. You've achieved justice. Now comes the slow, sacred work of healing. 3 months after the court's decision, I received an unexpected letter, not from my parents, but from Lillian. Unlike their past manipulative attempts at reconciliation, her words carried an unmistakable weight of remorse. Alara, she wrote, I won't insult you by asking for forgiveness. I just need you to know that I finally see how deeply I've hurt you, not just in the inheritance battle, but throughout our entire lives. I've started therapy to address my gambling addiction and the deeper insecurities that fed my jealousy toward you. My therapist suggested I make amends where I can, though she admits some damage can't be undone. If you're open to meeting even once, I'd be grateful for the chance to apologize face to face. If not, I understand. Regardless, I want you to know Grandpa was right to choose you. You deserved so much better than the way our family treated you. Lillian. After careful thought and several long conversations with Dr. Sharma, I agreed to meet her. We chose a quiet cafe in a neighborhood that held no memories for us. Neutral ground, far from old ghosts. Lillian arrived looking different. Her clothes were simpler, her face bare of heavy makeup, and the artificial confidence she once carried seemed to have vanished. When she saw me, her steps faltered, as if the gravity of the moment nearly overwhelmed her. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly, taking the seat across from me. "Honestly, I didn't think you would." "I almost didn't," I replied. She nodded, accepting it without protest. "I don't know where to begin," she said, voice trembling. "Except to say that I'm sorry, not just for the will, but for everything, for taking your things when we were kids, for making sure you always came second, for watching Dad pull you down the stairs and doing nothing to stop it." Her voice broke as tears welled in her eyes. "Why did you do it?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for months. Was it really just about the money? She stared down at her untouched coffee. At first, yes. When the will was read, I was shocked, furious. My whole life, Mom and Dad told me I was the heir. Finding out Grandpa chose you, it felt like the ground dropped out from under me. Her voice steadied. But when they started faking documents and plotting to declare him incompetent, I knew it was wrong. I told myself we were just fixing an injustice, that maybe you had manipulated him. It was easier than admitting I wasn't who he believed in. "Why didn't you stop them?" I asked. "You could have spoken up." "Because I was a coward," she answered simply. "And because I was drowning in debt. The gambling, it was worse than you knew. There were threats, dangerous people. When Mom and Dad offered to make it all disappear in exchange for my cooperation, I convinced myself I had no other choice." Her honesty, though painful, felt like the first real conversation we'd ever had. We spoke for nearly 3 hours, unraveling decades of rivalry and resentment. Lillian didn't ask for money or power or even a relationship, only understanding and maybe someday forgiveness. As we stood to leave, she handed me a small package. "Grandpa's cufflinks," she said. "Dad took them the day they moved out. I tracked them down at a pawn shop and bought them back." It was a small gesture, but one that pierced deep. I wasn't ready to welcome her back into my life, not fully. But as I walked away, I carried a quiet hope that healing, for both of us, might finally be possible. With the legal battles finally behind me and the company now firmly under my direction, I turned my focus to honoring my grandfather's legacy in ways that felt meaningful. Using a portion of my inheritance, I established the Arthur Caldwell Foundation for Business Ethics, dedicated to promoting integrity and principled leadership in corporate governance. The foundation's first initiative was a scholarship program for underprivileged business students, bright minds who, like my grandfather in his youth, might otherwise be overlooked. Though the estate was legally mine, it never truly felt like a place where a new life could begin. The elegant rooms still held too many painful memories, each echo a ghost from a life I no longer wished to inhabit. After careful reflection, I decided to sell the mansion and donate a substantial portion of the proceeds to organizations supporting survivors of domestic abuse and financial manipulation. I purchased a more modest home in Boston, close enough to the company headquarters, but far enough from my past to symbolize a fresh start. The move coincided with a significant restructuring of Hawthorne Holdings, refocusing the company on the kind of ethical business practices my grandfather had always championed. During this transition, I met Dr. Elias Vance, a brilliant environmental engineer developing sustainable technologies that caught our interest. Unlike past relationships, where my last name and wealth were often the main attraction, Elias was refreshingly unimpressed by status. "I care more about what you're doing with the company than the fact that you own it," he said over our first dinner. "Anyone can inherit wealth. Using it to make a real difference, that's what's impressive." Our relationship unfolded slowly, rooted in mutual respect and shared values rather than surface-level charm. In every sense of the word, Elias became my partner, supporting my healing journey, while gently urging me to look ahead instead of backward. A year after the court's decision, I had an unexpected encounter with my parents at a charity gala in New York. I'd been told they might be there, but I chose to attend anyway, refusing to let their presence dictate my choices any longer. It was a painfully awkward moment. My mother froze mid-conversation the moment she spotted me across the room. My father's face flushed with a strange mix of shame and anger. After a hesitant pause, they approached, wearing practiced social smiles. "You look well, Alara," my mother said, her voice unnaturally bright. "We've been hoping to speak with you," my father added. "The company is thriving under your leadership. Perhaps it's time we talked about rebuilding a few bridges. I looked at them calmly, taking in the designer outfits they still clung to, even in reduced circumstances. The old version of me might have shrunk under their rehearsed charm, or felt tugged by the invisible thread of family obligation. But the woman I had become recognized the performance for what it was, another calculated attempt at control. "I'm afraid there's nothing left for us to discuss," I replied, my voice even but firm. "My family now consists of those who value and respect me. I wish you both well, but that chapter of my life is closed." As I turned and walked away, I felt something heavy lift, a final release from the burden of needing anything from people who had once broken me so completely. Later that month, on the anniversary of my grandfather's passing, I visited his grave alone. The simple granite stone reflected his values, substance over show, etched with his name, his dates, and the phrase he lived by: integrity above all. I placed a small bouquet of sailboat flags beside the flowers, a private signal from our sailing days that meant mission accomplished. "I wish you could see what we've built," I whispered, running my fingers gently across the cool stone. "The foundation is helping so many people. The company is stronger than ever, and for the first time, I feel like I'm becoming the person you always believed I could be." As I stood there, I reflected on all the lessons the past year had carved into me. Some through pain, others through grace. That family is defined by love and loyalty, not by blood alone. That strength often rises from our deepest wounds. That justice, while necessary, is only the beginning of healing. And that it is our choices, not our circumstances, that ultimately define us. I had entered this fight as a victim, battling for what was legally mine, but I emerged as something more: a leader, a builder, and finally, the captain of my own life. That evening, as I sat in my new study with Elias reading quietly nearby, I turned the familiar weight of my grandfather's pocket watch in my hand and allowed myself a soft smile. The road I had traveled, once marked by the sting of being dragged from my home with nothing but a broken suitcase, now led to a life rebuilt not only in honor of my grandfather's wishes, but in full recognition of my own worth. It had been, in every sense, a remarkable journey. The inheritance was never just about wealth. It was about reclaiming my value when no one else could see it. It was about standing firm in the face of betrayal, even when surrender would have been the easier choice. And above all, it was about becoming the kind of person who could walk through fire without being consumed by bitterness. A woman who could seek justice without vengeance, and who could rise from the ashes of fractured relationships with something meaningful in her hands. That, more than any trust fund or deed or corporate title, is the legacy my grandfather truly left me. A quiet, unwavering belief that I was worthy of it all. If you've ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours, or hold your ground when the world expected you to shrink, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Where did you find your strength when it felt like everything was lost? And if this story spoke to you, don't forget to subscribe for more reflections on standing tall when life tries to knock you down. Share this video with someone who may need a little reminder that they too can rise again. Because sometimes, our greatest strength comes not from the easy moments, but from the ones that nearly broke us. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope you always find the courage to claim what's rightfully yours.